Twin Cities pastor now facing accusations of inappropriate conduct from more than 20 years ago.
Pastor Mark Darling has been on administrative leave, and Evergreen Church has hired an outside investigator. Tonight, the woman making the claims is talking publicly for the first time to Tom Lydon of the Fox 9 investigators. What'd she have to say?
Well, you know, we've seen a lot of these stories in the last few months. Most of them take place in the context of the workplace. This one, though, is a little different. This is not your typical Me Too story. Yes, it involves allegations and denials of inappropriate conduct from decades ago. But there's another important factor here: religion and faith. At the center of it all, a woman who claims she was betrayed by a man of God and her church.
Just like right now, like my palms are sweating and my heart is racing and I feel sick to my stomach.
It's the drive Suzanne Van Dyke never thought she'd make again. Back to a place she admits she's never quite left.
This is a pastor. This is a man of the cloth. This is, you know, like you think that he would never do something.
It was 30 years ago she began coming here to Fort Snelling State Park with her pastor, a man of God she trusted implicitly. What happened here, she says, has stayed with her ever since.
It was all like I care about you, I love you, and that's why we're doing this.
It was on Twitter in January that Suzanne Van Dyke broke her long silence, claiming publicly she was the victim of abuse at the hands of Mark Darling, a founding member of Evergreen Community Church. Darling is also pastor of the Rock Church in South Minneapolis. With his trademark leather jacket, Darling is known for his charisma and plain talk.
She said, "Mark, I would give anything to feel like a virgin again." And I said, "Well, let me tell you about Jesus Christ."
Suzanne met Pastor Darling in 1987 when she was a freshman at the University of Minnesota. Suzanne was 19, Pastor Darling 31. He was married with children Suzanne would sometimes babysit. In those drives to Fort Snelling, in late-night phone calls, and in the basement of the pastor's home, she says things got intimate in a way she never wanted or encouraged.
Like he would ask me, like, what kind of sexual positions I liked and what sexual positions this guy liked, and what did I sound like when I had an orgasm.
I mean, what you're describing, he was grooming you.
Mm-hmm. He was. And then it became him hugging me, and he'd have an erection and not letting go.
Things never went further than that, but Suzanne says there were about 20 such incidents over the next 5 years. That it stopped only when she married her husband, John, who also became a pastor at Evergreen. Mark Darling even officiated at their wedding.
I was mentored by him, sad to say, yes.
In 2001, Suzanne and John say they confronted Mark Darling about his behavior in the presence of church leaders and a Christian counselor.
But she was highly encouraged to not bring up specific indicting incidents.
So Evergreen did not want her to mention the sexual stuff that allegedly happened with Mark Darling.
Correct.
But Suzanne says, and John confirms, that she did bring up the sexualized conversations. The Van Dykes left with the understanding Darling would get counseling and step away from the pulpit for a time. To their knowledge, he never did either.
Tears and a lot of I'm sorries. And the I'm sorries were all, I'm sorry you took it that way. Like, what do you sound like when you have an orgasm? And then I'm sorry you took it that way. It's like, how are you supposed to take that?
But he admitted to nothing.
He apologized.
But he didn't say what he was apologizing for.
No.
He was sorry you took it that way.
Yeah.
Evergreen responded to Suzanne's initial Twitter post with this reply. Suzanne was fully heard on this matter 20 years ago. After careful listening and a thorough review of all the facts, the mediator was completely satisfied by the transparency and integrity of the Darlings and Evergreen Church's response. And Suzanne's social media post brought immediate condemnation from many of those she once worshiped with. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, one man wrote.
I was like, wow, that happened to me too.
But others were beginning to see a pattern.
He would talk a lot about God and a lot about his vision, but he also talked, I felt like he was very obsessed with sex.
Natalie Hoffman went to Evergreen in the 90s and says Pastor Darling would also talk to her about sex in explicit detail.
He would talk about how he needed it, how men in general needed it all the time. In the woods, I just remember thinking, I don't think I should be here with him alone. And I also remember feeling I was a little bit scared and kind of morbidly fascinated by the idea that he might make a move on me there.
Back 25 years ago, did you consider this abuse?
No, I didn't even know what abuse was. I mean, if you would have said abuse, I would have thought, well, you'd have to be like penetrated. That would be sexual abuse.
But
or
you do
beaten.
now. But you do now.
I do now, yeah.
What do you call it? What happened to you?
I would call it spiritual abuse and manipulation with some sexual undertones.
Suzanne says 2 other women have given her anonymous statements she posted on Facebook. Fox 9 met one of the women who declined to go on camera but writes, "After I was married, I remember sharing intimate details with Mark about our sex life. I even shared private things about our honeymoon with him. I never would have done so without being manipulated."
Since we've been out of that environment, we've had more conversations with other people and other women who are in similar situations, and so it's not an isolated incident.
The Fox 9 investigators have tried repeatedly over the last month to talk to Pastor Darling about Suzanne's claims. Through a church spokesperson, he unequivocally denies the allegations. But in late January, Evergreen put Pastor Darling on administrative leave and launched an independent investigation. In a statement to the Fox 9 investigators, Evergreen now says they learned the detailed nature of these allegations in January, not 20 years ago like they initially claimed. Exactly what the church knew and when they knew it is also part of their independent investigation.
People who will be watching this will wonder, why is she coming forward now?
The whole Me Too movement. Tom, I am amazed. Like, what happened that the tables have been turned?
After sweeping through the worlds of entertainment, journalism, and politics, the Me Too movement has landed at the pulpit of evangelical megachurches.
I regretfully had a sexual incident with a female high school senior in the church.
In Memphis, megachurch pastor Andy Savage stepped down after admitting to coercing a teenager to perform oral sex 20 years earlier when he was a youth minister. He confessed and got a standing ovation. In Chicago, Pastor Bill Hybels stepped down amid accusations of sexual harassment. According to an investigation by the Chicago Tribune, the behavior included suggestive comments, extended hugs, an unwanted kiss, and invitations to hotel rooms. Hybels denies the allegations.
A core value is, we're kind of better than the secular world. We are going to take care of our own issues in our own ways.
Sheila Engelmeyer has specialized in sexual harassment cases for more than 30 years, representing both victims and the accused. She's had more than a dozen cases involving churches.
Because the real issue is, what is the power dynamic? The more intense the power dynamic, the more likely there is to be misconduct. So what can be more powerful than being close to God?
How far back should we go in someone's history to look at their conduct?
When you ask me the moral question, if the initial person handled it poorly, it seems completely fair that somebody should be able to call that organization on it until they handle it right. So this church has another opportunity to handle it right.
Evergreen appears to be trying. They hired Joan Harris, a respected attorney, to handle the investigation. And on a webpage where the church is providing updates, Evergreen said it would communicate the outcome. And, quote, if the allegations are found to be true, in the case of a leader, it will be dealt with firmly and transparently by the board. Evergreen has made several attempts to get Suzanne to participate in that investigation. A few weeks ago, Suzanne met with 2 Evergreen board members as they once again tried to persuade her to meet with their outside investigator. But Suzanne is suspicious. She's been here before. She now wants the entire investigation to be public.
Conversations with Mark always had a sexualized tone. Mark always had an interest in my physical self. And the conversation was always sexualized.
For Suzanne, who once expressed her thoughts and feelings only to her journal, silence is no longer spiritual.
All of it was framed by Mark that it was care and love. And it wasn't.
Suzanne Van Dyke tells me she still has no plans to meet with the church's outside investigator. But Natalie Hoffman, the other woman you heard from, has met with that investigator. This outside investigation has been going on since February. Evergreen has said it hopes the investigation is wrapped up by the end of May. But Evergreen says while the results will be made public, the full report will not be. For the Fox 9 investigators, I'm Tom Lydon.